What's up, hobby friends? My name is Casey and this is eBay Miniature Rescues. Today, we're going to take a look at some 2nd edition scouts for Warhammer 40,000. These are Space Marine Scouts, specifically 2nd edition pewter scouts that came out in 1993. This squad of bolter-carrying, knife-wielding infiltrators are not your average Space Marines. From what I can tell, they are purely fodder for the actual Space Marines, but these models are really cool. I was looking for models on eBay and I just happened to come across these. Something about the sculpts really got to me. The size is a little smaller and the way they look is just a little different than what we're generally used to in 40k, especially when compared to a modern Space Marine. Just look at that size difference. I got out some of my old books to see what these guys were even used for. Turns out, there are some pretty interesting differences between some of the Space Marine chapters. For the most part, these guys have a few basic rules. Basic weapons as shown on the models, and they have the Infiltrator special rule, which at the time seems to mean that they can be placed ahead of the army some amount of inches and put into cover. The most interesting thing about these models comes in the old Space Wolves supplement. Not only are these models labeled as elites in the Space Wolves book, but the rules allow them to deep strike into enemy territory and take a much more varied set of weapons, making these Marines actually useful on the table. Of course, we are talking about Warhammer in the 90s. Things probably have changed and not all for the better. The thing is, these models just look awesome, and I wanted to pick up a set of them to put into my personal collection. Eventually, I'd like to build a simple Space Marine army, maybe something for Kill Team, so it makes sense to have a nice variety of Space Marine type models. I picked these guys up on a so-so deal of about 20 bucks. But the question is, could I have done better? Let's take a look at eBay and see what kind of prices these are going for these days. Just doing a simple search, it seems like there are quite a lot of scouts on eBay. Most of them look newer than mine, but around the same price. There are quite a few auctions to choose from, which is always nice as a buyer. You can usually make a deal with someone and get models for less because their auction's just been sitting in with tons of others for weeks on end with no action. The time is ripe to pick up scouts if you really want them. Even going back to 1st edition Rogue Trader models, 3 for $10 could be a lot worse, especially with good weapons attached to them. If you can find a squad of 5 of these guys for around $20 in good condition, then you're doing alright. Now that I have the models, let's take a look at what needs to happen in order to get these guys onto the tabletop. First off, these models were previously stripped. I can see a little bit of leftover paint in just a few areas that I'll try and scrape away with my scrapey dental tools. Super finessed equipment, I know. After I go through each model like that, I'll take an inventory of any weird lines or molding on the models. Oftentimes with metal models, there will be a little bit of flash where the metal came out of the mold just a little bit. It's very similar to mold lines on modern plastic and taken care of in pretty much the same way. Pewter is a soft metal and can be bent or sanded pretty easily. For the softer lines, I'll use a sanding stick that'll take care of pretty much all of the cleanup on these models. For basing, I want something a little fancier and secure for these guys. Just because they're small and probably won't last longer than a turn or two in an actual game, doesn't mean I want to skimp on their bases. Let me do a quick check for the modern base size and we'll figure something out. Yeah, looks like they're still on 25mm bases, which is a little annoying because that's really small, even for these models. So let's put them on something a little bit bulkier, still 25mm but built up. I happen to have these cork and plastic card bases from an old project. These will make for perfect platforms for our scouts. In order to get these guys on the bases, I'll need to cut away the slotted base parts and file down the bottoms of their feet. From there, I'll use a pin vise and drill a paperclip size hole into their feet as well as the corresponding holes onto the bases where they'll get glued down. This will ensure a nice bond from model to base. Once that's taken care of, we need to prime the models and get them ready for some color. Now that the minis are primed, it's time to choose a color scheme. From the research I did, it looks like the power play would be to go with Space Wolves colors and make them elite scouts. But you know what? I don't really care about being the best. I just want to paint what's fun. Let's take a look at some Google images and see if we can draw some inspiration. So far it's kind of samey. Mostly a single color for the armor and leather. I want something that stands out a little more and gives us something more to look at. Immediately, this picture really grabs me. Maybe the yellow is bright or the drama of the artwork, but this is kind of what I'm talking about. Yeah, I really like the look of these Imperial Fists, and Imperial Fist Space Marines are right up my alley. I'm gonna shoot for an Imperial Fist Scout Squad. Let's see what kind of magic I can make, or, you know. For now, let's try and tackle the armor and then move on to some other decisions. Since we did a strong zenithal highlight over the primer, we're already set up for a nice filter of yellow through the airbrush. Alternatively, contrast yellow on such small models would also look pretty great. But before we lay down that color, I'm going to come in with some burnt umber ink and put in some shadows. The yellow over the top of this will create nice shading in the armor panels and make it much easier and quicker to get these guys onto the table. The nice thing about using this burnt umber is that if the shadows need a little more punch after the yellow, then the transparency and consistency of the ink makes it really easy to come in and do that. For the filter color, you can go several different directions. Thinning down a bright yellow paint works just fine, although you need to be a little lighter on the trigger of your airbrush. Transparent yellow ink is great, as well as golden high flow acrylics, which is what I'm opting to use today. I enjoy this line of paints because they work very much like inks. They are all very transparent and can be used as a filter color for almost everything. They also happen to make some really awesome fluorescent colors that are pretty hard to come by in other paint ranges. So, working the yellow pretty slowly so we don't get any buildup, I'm going to cover all of the models. You can see where that burnt umber really makes a difference and gives this yellow a really nice warmth to it. Perfect for quick and easy Imperial Fists. Now that the armor is pretty much taken care of, the rest of the model just needs to be filled in. Flesh tears red for the Aquila, specifically so the darker parts settle in the recesses and leave a little bit of that yellow show through in the highlights. Yellow and red make orange, so we kind of get a nice free highlight on the center of the chest. It's not quite orange, but it looks nice. For the leather, I went for a dark brown and highlighted with a warm orangey brown, finishing it off with some skin tone color to make a little bit of that leather texture. The metallics were all done with Vallejo metal color silver, so that we can come back with a wash and highlight back up with bright aluminum. Now for the heads. I left these for last because it's the part I hate the most. You only get so many chances to fix your mistakes when painting heads. So I wanted to separate these in order to force myself to kind of pay a little more attention when I got to this step. First things first, let's fill in the hair. I'm going with black, brown, and kind of a lighter brown, just to give each model a little separation from each other. Once the hair is filled in, I'll then mix in a little bit of off-white with the initial base coat and highlight a ring around the sides and back of the hair. This gives the impression that light is hitting them from above and makes the hair just look a little bit nicer than a flat base color. For the faces, I start with a base coat of cadian flesh tone. I want to make absolutely sure this paint doesn't clog any details, so I do several really thin coats, making sure that each coat dries in between. After each model has sufficiently dried, I'll use some Reikland Flesh Shade to give the face definition. I also came in with some Agrax Earth Shade and went over the hair, just to bring the highlights together and add a little more depth to that lighter colored hair. Once again, after everything is dry, I went over the raised details with cadian flesh tone. Leaving the washes in the recesses gives nice definition to each piece of the face and gives you a pretty easy roadmap to highlight and fill in details. I focused on the brows, noses, and cheekbones and highlighted them with Kislev flesh. Then I added just a touch of off-white to mix in and give those highlights a little bit more structure. Finally, pure off-white in the eyes. Now, there are a lot of models out there with good eyes, or even better, something covering their eyes so you don't actually have to paint them. Personally, I'm a fan of the no-eyed model, and what I mean by that is the model with glowing eyes instead of weird-looking eyes that go all over the place. This, of course, comes down to personal choice. Seeing as these models are going back into my army and not back on eBay, I'm choosing to tell the story that their eyes are glowy and red. So I'm going to drop a little bit of bloodletter glaze into their eyes and dot them with white again, giving them a menacing look rather than screw up a perfectly fine face with a disgusting blob of black in each eye. Again, personal choice, but there it is. After that, the last thing I want to do is add a bit of Tamiya panel liner to the silver. The oil wash will creep into the recesses and give these parts a well-oiled look to finish off our models. So we took old models that we found on eBay and with a little bit of work turned them into playable models. A little bit of sanding work to take care of the mold lines and flashing, and some filing to get these guys rebased onto newer, nicer bases. With all of that, did we accomplish the goal of getting some cool Imperial Fist scouts? Let's find out. Honestly, I'm really happy with the way that these turned out. They ended up being the perfect models to just sit back and enjoy the process of painting. A few simple techniques got us some nice effects, and the rest was just a nice straightforward fill-in-the-blank kind of paint job. I also really like adding pigment powders to yellow models. It makes the yellow look weathered in a way that only pigments can, and it ties them into their surroundings really well. Thank you once again for joining me on another miniature rescue. If you like something about this video, please feel free to like, share, and subscribe as it really helps out the channel. Once again, I'm Casey, and I will see you in the next video.